And now it is really a program that I know is something that we all need and will be looking forward to, which is cybersecurity, how to protect yourself on the internet, which is something I probably think about when I'm not thinking about the Hillary Clinton program. So you should know about this. Kish Melwani is here, and he is the president of ServiceByte and has over 20 years of information technology experience. He is joined, somebody's raising their hand. I'll talk about that in a minute. By Ryan, and again, Ryan, your last name is?
Brackenridge.
Brackenridge. I just saw it. Somebody blocked it off, so I couldn't see.
That's all right.
And they will be discussing it. If you're interested in asking a question, please put it on the chat function, which is at the bottom. Well, I don't know where it is on your screen, but hit that and type in your question. Kish said that he will answer questions as it arises. So if you're interested, please do that. And the second thing I want to tell you is this program is being recorded. So if you've missed anything, you'll be able to go back to our website, which is chappaqua.library.org, and revisit it. So now please welcome both Kish and Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kish Melwani, president of ServiceByte. I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. And I know I'd mentioned that we'll have some room for questions during the presentation. What we'll do is after certain sections, I will go ahead and open up the room for any of those questions. Ryan will go ahead and review them with me, and we'll go ahead and address them during the presentation. Let's go ahead. So before we get jumping right into the cybersecurity presentation, I thought I'd just let you know a little bit about us and who we are and what we do. Our key services are to provide training and education, advice, and all things IT related, security and backup, and remote and on-site support. Ryan is our home services manager, and we all specialize in working with, and his specialty, of course, is specifically working with seniors, families, and of course, individuals. And our contact information is here on this slide in case you are curious and want to note down our information or any questions after the meeting. And I'll go ahead and also put that slide up there at the very end, so this way you have that. So what's on today's agenda? We're going to talk about 4 things. The first is, what is the state of cybersecurity? An overview of threats, how you can protect yourself, and we're going to go through a little ethical hacking at the end of this presentation. I like to keep these as fun as possible, so we're a little kooky group, and we look forward to keeping this engaging. I also do want to share that you do not have to take notes. We actually have a PDF of a lot of recommendations that we're going to be presenting at this meeting, and those will be available to you. Joan and the Chappaqua Library will share them with you after the presentation. So sit back and relax. So let's talk about the state of cybersecurity. I'd like to start off with what happened in 2016. In 2016, LinkedIn had a breach that impacted 100 million accounts. And if you know anything about the population of the US, which is about 300 million, that means 1 out of every 3 Americans was impacted by this. Why is this so important? And why are we talking about this in the first place? Cybersecurity is a very complex area where when this happened with LinkedIn, what actually happened was a hacker group went to LinkedIn and said, hey, we notice you're not storing users' passwords securely. We think that the insecure manner in which you're storing them is not safe, and we want to have you change your practices. Well, LinkedIn did not comply with them. And unfortunately, the group actually published those passwords on the internet, on the dark web, which is the black market of the internet. And why this is bad is because security researchers found out, and they've known a lot of this for years, but it became such a significant impact that people were reusing their passwords on other websites. And with this large amount of data that was exposed on the internet, people were signing into other accounts that you may have owned on LinkedIn, but not necessarily if you'd use that same password from LinkedIn onto another website, say if it was Amazon, Chase Bank. Well, those same passwords helped people get into other accounts. It didn't take much work for these bad guys to do that. So we just spoke about passwords being an issue. It's an important thing to make sure that your security is in top shape. And that's why we're going to talk about this example a little bit more later on and what you could have changed to make sure that you enhance your security. But let's move forward to another year here. How about just a year later, 2017? Equifax had a major incident where 143 million accounts, half the population of the US, that means 1 out of every 2 of us, were part of this breach. And what happened was the hacker groups got a hold of personal identification information. So they were able to take this information and do something really bad with it. What were the bad things? They could take out a loan under our names. So this way, when we're ready to buy a house or sell a house or make another transaction like lease a car, we would be ineligible because somebody's already taken out a loan under your name and bought a house. You do not have the credit to buy that car or lease something. And this is a problem because forget passwords. Now you cannot live life normally because somebody has got credit lines against your name. Unfortunately, it gets worse. In 2018, 87 million accounts were part of an interesting little situation where a group called Cambridge Analytica was publicly advising people that they could actually use Facebook data to influence people's decision-making. And more specifically, they were looking at influencing users in politics, in the political climate. It's very well possible that we have today's political climate as a result of what happened through Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. So these 3 examples highlight one of the biggest concerns that we have when it comes to cybersecurity. How people can use passwords against you, how your identity could be used in a way where you can no longer live a normal life. And now they're trying to control our minds, where we can be influenced to make certain decisions that we may not necessarily support. While we talk about these incidents that have occurred years ago, I like to focus our attention to what happened just this year. And instead of focusing on these multi-billion-dollar organizations and industries, how about just talking about what happened within our own doors? The 2 examples I like to talk about are one that I encountered in February, where a contractor had contacted me from Yonkers, and he said that he had mistakenly wired $100,000 to his quote-unquote attorney in Ireland. Upon investigating, what we found was that it was the attorney's email that was actually hacked. And what was actually happening was the attorney was sending our client, our future client at that time, a request to send some funds. But this third party that was interjecting into her emails was observing activity to see who was asking for wire transfers. And what they did was they actually modified her email, the attorney's email, so that she was unaware that there was a whole conversation happening between our future client and this scammer. And unfortunately, he did wire money, which he thought was to his attorney, but instead he did it to a third-party hacker. And unfortunately, bank rules have changed a little bit. They used to protect their institution by saying, hey, look, if it's $200,000 or $300,000, we want to protect the institution, we'll just give you your money back and we'll do an investigation. Unfortunately, they haven't given him his money back yet. They are still pending an investigation, and he's out $100,000 until he can figure out what to do with this and how he can resolve his issues. This is scary. And I've got another example. This happened to one of our clients, actually. And I'm not so nervous about mentioning this because we had met with our client in October of last year. And we had identified 3 major risks to their business. But our client only wanted to address one because of concerns that just didn't make sense to them. It may have been a budget concern. It may have been just a special security concern. But unfortunately, because they left some things unaddressed, in February of this year, a hacker got into their system and deployed something called a ransomware. Now, ransomware is a type of infection that will encrypt your files, meaning they lock your files against you. This is a perfectly legitimate tool that allows you to protect your files against outside threats, but it was being used against them. So a hacker put a lock on all their files and basically disabled the business for 3.5 weeks, and the client had to pay the ransom. They were negotiating the $8,000 ransom down to $4,000, which was great. Unfortunately, they had costs beyond that to remediate their network, restore their operations, and let's not just excuse that they were down for 3.5 weeks where they were not able to generate revenue, they were not able to pay their staff, and it was a true business killer. So these things are not just occurring at multi-million or multi-billion-dollar organizations, they're even happening right here within this county at businesses that you may already be visiting. Let's get an overview of the threats that are out there. There are 3 main types of threats. The first is a computer threat, something that affects some type of a computer. Second is an email threat, something that affects your messaging. And something in the service area. It could be a cloud service, it could be a website, and we're going to go a bit deeper into each of these. So let's first talk about the computer threats that are out there. We've all heard about viruses. They've existed for well over 2 decades, and most of their objectives are to delete files or try to change the status of your computer in some way. But what's more common in recent years are malware. And it's not one type of malware. They have several subcategories. So I want to go over each of these in brief, with a brief summary. Adware is a type of malware that delivers advertising to you. It tries to influence you into seeing ads that you may have not seen on websites otherwise. Keyloggers actually observe all the keystrokes of your keyboard to see what type of personal information they can obtain from you. So if you type that password in, well, guess what? They might also know about that. Spyware is designed to monitor and observe any type of activity. It's essentially spying on what you're doing to try to get some information. A Trojan horse, just like the Trojan horse story you may be familiar with, is essentially designed to be software that looks like it's safe in your computer. It allows itself into the computer, or you allow it into the computer, assuming it's a legitimate tool, and it actually causes harm. A man-in-the-middle attack. This is something that we've been seeing out there as well, where some type of a hacker group or software or service will interject in between your connection and a secure connection to a service. And essentially their objective is to observe all activity and try to get some information from you. Rootkits. These are types of files that the computer thinks are completely legitimate and safe. Unfortunately, they're not. Scareware. This is a type of thing that we see often on websites where an advertisement will actually consume your entire screen, make it difficult for it to close itself, and try to scare you into dialing an 800 number or clicking to download a software which could be malicious for your computer. Essentially, they're trying to scare you in order to do something. And lastly, we had spoken about this briefly, ransomware, which locks your files against you. This has been the single largest threat in our industry over the past few years. It has disabled businesses. It has bankrupted certain organizations. People have lost precious photos and memories. It's been a tough one. Let's move on to email threats. What are the email threats that are out there? I always like to start off with phishing. Let's see what phishing looks like. Oops. Oh, Ryan, I think you put in the wrong slide here.
Sorry about that.
Always good for a chuckle. This is what phishing looks like. A Netflix email. This, of course, is a service that a lot of us already use, and it looks legitimate to us. This message says, hey, your subscription, we're sorry to say goodbye. We noticed that you asked us to cancel your membership. Oh, wait, no, I didn't ask to cancel my membership. let me just click on that restart membership button, which is essentially what the scammers want you to do. Anyone who is trying to phish you, their objective is for you to click on that button, be brought to a page that looks like Netflix's actual page, so that you can log in and take care of this issue. Unfortunately, there was never an issue in the first place. And when you logged into that website that looks like Netflix, you just gave your username and password away to somebody somewhere in the world. And they're going to use that to try to get into various other accounts. It's not so much that we're concerned about people in Australia watching our Netflix movies. It's more about them trying to use those same passwords in other places. Here's another example. Good old IRS email. You know, something that you'll never really have, where IRS is going to send you an email. Most of the times, it's going to be a letter. And unfortunately, this scam here is hoping that you will not note that, you won't be aware of that, and you'll actually click on the link to address your tax refund or your issue, or whatever it is that's going on. But the problem with this is there's enough of a telltale sign here, telltale signs that tell you something's wrong. First is they're not addressing you by name. They're saying, "Dear taxpayer," that's an issue. That doesn't make sense. And there's just, the language is just not professional. Instead of saying, "We noticed your account information is missing," it just is full of poor grammar. It just doesn't make sense. I'd like to see if we can maybe use the chat a little bit here to see if the third one is something that you can help us with. Here's an email from UPS. Does anybody want to use the chat here to let us know anything that they notice suspicious about this that tips you off to this being inauthentic? And I know that Ryan and I are monitoring that to see if there's any questions that are being posted. Please feel free.
There is nothing yet.
Okay.
Oh, Carol says UPS only uses numbers and
That's
they're
a good
tracking
point.
numbers.
That's
It's
a good point.
catch.
Yes. There is actually, and good catch on that, Carol. Although I do know that they do have one number, one letter at the very least in the UPS tracking numbers. They typically start with a 1Z, and then the rest is numeric, and it catches you on this. But very good catch. The other is they don't know your name. What kind of billion-dollar company that is tracking your package doesn't know who you are? Somebody spoon-fed them that information to let them know who the package is being delivered to. So thank you very much for commenting on that. So let's move on to some of the service threats that are out there. These are the types of threats that are impacting us, and they typically fall into 4 categories. They're either financial threats, legal and medical, personal, and something we put in the other bucket. So let's go into some of the examples that we're seeing out there of methods that people are using to scam or threaten us. The most popular one that's existed for many years, even predating the internet, is a good old sweepstakes charity lottery scam. You've won $1 million, but in order for you to get that $1 million, we need you to pay a fee to collect that money. That doesn't even make sense. I mean, the first thing I want to say is, hey, why don't you just take the money out of the money you're going to give me? In fact, I'll add $10,000 to it as a courtesy. Thank you so much for the $1 million. Too good to be true. And unfortunately, they're hoping that they're going to prey on somebody who is in an unfortunate situation that really is hoping for this to be genuine. And the best thing you could do is just stay away. It's just very dangerous. It's not safe to approach because it's too good to be true. Social Security. This is a big one that a lot of us, especially some folks who depend on this for income, you might get a call from the Social Security Administration, somebody saying that something's wrong with their Social Security card, it's suspended, please pay the fee to restore it. And when you go and do that, of course, you just gave your credit card number away to some scammer who just took your money and ran with it. So watch out for those. And also Social Security usually doesn't give you a call, they're gonna send you some letter. It'll be usually in that type of format. Homeowner reverse mortgage scams are also on the rise. we notice, especially with the senior population, this tends to be very popular, where you own your home outright. There's equity in that home, and somebody comes over and says, hi, we can help you with your retirement plans. We can get you to the next level in exchange for some type of a fee or a structure of doing something with your home. We're going to go and take care of that for you. Of course, they'll take the fee up front and never talk to you again, but they've already made away with the money. They move on. So be careful of anyone that approaches you. Try to work with banks. And IRS. Of course, this is a very interesting one because the IRS definitely never really calls us. And you get a call from the IRS that says, you know, they're going to use some fake name or bogus ID, and they'll say, hey, this is John Smith with badge number 2372, and you owe us money, and they'll get a little aggressive with you. They might say, hey, you've got to pay this or you're going to be in jail. They're going to threaten you. Threatening is a big tactic that these guys use. Be careful because you do not want to engage with those folks. Medicare scams are also on the rise, similar to the Social Security scams. Somebody will call you and tell you that, hey, there's something going on with your Medicare and we're going to deactivate it. You need to pay the bill. And of course, somebody who's juggling with something here may not be aware of what's real and what's not. Maybe they had a medical bill last month for a doctor's visit and they think it's for that. Unfortunately, it may have not been for that. So make sure that you recognize who it is, where it's coming from, and that it's authentic. Counterfeit prescription drugs, this is a very challenging one because what you're seeing here out there is organizations, say in Canada, that say, oh, well, we can give you drugs for a lower price. And you don't know if it's actually authentic. It may be some third party or some scammer out there. And what we've heard of are cases where people were sent placebos, which doesn't actually take care of your condition, or worse, situations where people were sending you medication that treats other types of symptoms. And that's a problem because now all of a sudden, not only are you not helping your own issue, you're also not able to, you may actually be intensifying things, making things worse. And even our industry is not exempt. Tech support scams are very popular. Somebody calls you randomly, says, hi, we noticed that something is wrong with your computer. We want to help you. And being in our industry, we know a lot of people have issues with their computers. And what tends to happen is, hey, that computer's running slow, something's crashing, something's not right. It seems like a perfect case. Somebody magically called you and they noticed that your computer's not working right when truly there was no such thing. They just assume that maybe they'll catch you and trip you up at the right time, and that they'll, in exchange for a subscription plan for a year of service for only $200 or $300, they're going to give you the world. And some of these are actually legitimate. They're just not great operations. And the way that they get their clients is just sad, just unfortunate, and do not engage. Grandchild scams over the past few years have increased. Essentially what happens is somebody calls you and they say, something's happened to your grandson. And they're hoping, not necessarily that you'll engage them immediately, but maybe you'll react. And we've heard cases where people said, oh my God, what happened to Billy? And then even though you may not engage them, you realize, hey, this doesn't seem authentic, let me just hang up. They may call you 7 or 8 months down the road and say, hi, are you Joan Smith? Well, your son, Bill, your grandson, Billy, was involved in an accident and we need you to send money right away. Please help. And they're hoping to just get to that emotional connection in hopes that you will react quickly, give them that credit card number on the phone or route some money, ACH transfer some money, and they'll take advantage of it. So watch for the information you share on any phone calls. Do not mention family names. Home repair scams are also an issue where we're seeing cases where, especially in this climate with COVID-19 and construction being so costly, challenging to find the right construction folks because they're busy, somebody just shows up on your door and says, hey, I'm working down the street. Some of them do this legitimately, but they're going to, you can't tell the difference. They'll come in and say, hey, we're working down the street. And if you'd like, since you're in the area, we can also work on your home for a lower price. We just need you to put a deposit down and we can start as early as tomorrow. Doesn't that sound great? You put in the deposit, realize the guy never shows up again, and you lost your money. Romance scams, especially as now with COVID-19 and even prior to that, we have moved to the digital world for finding loved ones, for finding new relationships, and so have the criminals. There are criminals out there pretending to essentially connect with you and do it with 100 other people in hopes that one day they'll reach out to you 2 or 3 weeks later or a month later and say, I want to see you, but I've got to take a flight to New York. It's going to cost me $2,000. I need some living expenses. Could you send me some money and I'll see you next week and we'll be together. Really scary. Unfortunately, you pay that money, never see them again. And even in death, we are not exempt from scams. There are cases where people are now reading obituaries, contacting grieving families, widows, widowers, and saying, hey, I'm sorry Jimmy passed away, but Jimmy owed me $10,000, and I wish I'd spoken to him just 2 months ago, and I feel really bad. And then, of course, the grieving widow says, well, I understand as he passed away, I'm sorry, I'm just in not a good state here. Life insurance was for $700,000. I'm just going to give you that money right now, and let's move on. And of course, that's not the right way to go about it, but we can understand an emotional state. You want to make sure that you're aware of this so you don't commit this kind of situation. You don't have this situation for yourself. So I'd like to talk about some of the companies you should be worried about. And I'm sure with people in this event are also aware that they probably have one or more of these accounts. And the reason why I'm concerned about this is because, first of all, they play a strong role in our data and life. A lot of the things that we do today, looking up directions to go somewhere, communicating with family, doing business, entertaining ourselves, these are the very few companies that have the majority of our data. And we all have accounts with them. But most importantly, they can be hacked. And it's really scary because your information is there. We want to minimize those types of things. So this is a good segue into how you can protect yourself. Before I go further down this section, I'm not sure if there's any questions you want to put in the chat from what you've heard so far. If there aren't any, we can go ahead and move on. Ryan, do we have any questions?
No, nothing's came through, at least not yet. If you want to give it a minute or.
Yeah, I'll give it a few seconds. In the meanwhile, I guess we'll have to tell the best dad jokes ever, right? I'm out of dad jokes.
All right, let's keep it moving.
Thank you, sir. So how can you protect yourself? Most scammers have certain techniques that they use that are common. They tend to be on the phone. A lot of times when they're trying to really get to you, they exhibit some type of urgency. They may threaten you. And there's almost in all cases, money involved at some point. So what are some recommendations that we have to help protect you? Things that you can do today, right after this presentation. Minimize accepting phone calls from unfamiliar phone numbers. I know that calls from Texas, in most cases, California, Texas, wherever it is, it's out of state, it's going to be a scam. Not in all cases, and in those cases, they'll leave a voicemail and you can filter through that. But I will tell you, anything that is not familiar, if it's not already in your contact list, chances are it's a scam. And over 90% of today's phone calls tend to be scams, especially when we talk about the home phone numbers that we have out there. Also, any phone number that is local, that has the same prefix as yours. So if your prefix is 736 and you happen to be in Peekskill, 737 also Peekskill, well, that's an issue because originally you may have thought it was a neighbor. Usually those are hyper-local numbers, that prefix. But because so many people have switched from landlines to mobile phones, there's a lot of numbers that are freed up. And scammers are taking advantage of this situation. They are actually calling using the local numbers in hopes that you will more likely pick up that phone, when you should be doing the opposite. Be very careful. And also listen carefully to the words of the scammer. We can't tell you how many times people have called and said, "Hi, I'm Windows tech support. I'm here to help you with your problem." And you kind of wonder, why did they say it that way? It's because they can't represent themselves as Microsoft, because that's actually a legitimate American company that would sue them or would cause them trouble. They cannot represent themselves as Microsoft, but they can say Windows. And in the hopes that because most of us understand Windows is a Microsoft product, we're going to connect those dots and assume that one are the same. And you'll just miss that part. You just continue on. So be careful, ask them to repeat themselves. You'd be surprised to learn that there's some weird way that they're talking, and that could be a telltale sign. Also, you can actually challenge them a little. Ask them for their phone number so you can call them back. And a lot of scammers are on a mission. Their goal is to try to get you within that first time. So when you start to ask a question like that, they get tripped up and they actually start to hesitate, they start to change their tone. It gives you another sign that they may not be authentic. And never give personal information in the same way that we gave an example with the grandchild scam out there. Don't tell them your grandchild's name is Billy. Don't tell them anything about your name or your family names. It can all be used against you. Of course, never give financial information, credit card information, bank information. These are all things that could be, of course, used to deplete your money. And for computer errors or messages, this is something that we see in our industry often, where people will scan through websites and they'll say, "Hey, something's wrong with my AOL and I want to get some help." Well, the scammers are now actually looking for that type of search online, where if you type in AOL support, well, AOL, for instance, very famously, does not provide the support that a lot of us are hoping for. We have a free AOL account. We're not really getting much support unless you're paying them for it. And then in that case, you definitely have a phone number you can call. But when people start Googling different searches, these scammers are essentially putting advertisements that say, "We provide AOL tech support," when we're not actually even AOL. And when you click on those links or you call that number, you're actually reaching one of those scammers that are hoping to sign into your computer, show you something's wrong when nothing's really wrong, and actually take advantage of you by getting you on some type of a service or getting your credit card number and taking advantage of it. And all these recommendations are in a PDF that will be distributed to you after the presentation. How else can you protect yourself? Upgrade to a smartphone. I say this because a lot of us have home phone numbers, landlines. These don't make sense anymore. In fact, they're actually more of a danger to us than cell phones are. Smartphones are way better at this because what they can do is they actually can put the word scam likely or scammer on the actual caller ID when the scammer is calling you. And the way they can do this is because they have a system that actually tracks this kind of behavior and can add this information, which is great. It's a time saver. It's a more secure way of operating. When you see this, you can simply hit decline and move on. If it was important, they'll leave you a voicemail and you'll listen to it and understand if it makes sense or not. We highly recommend actually discontinuing that home phone number because it can be used against you. We've had a client that unfortunately, she's getting a bit older, and she's having issues where she's finding herself lonely. And when we had this conversation with her years ago, what was happening was at that time, she was continuously allowing the scammers to engage her. And they, at some point, took away thousands of dollars via ACH. And then a month later, they called again. They kept harassing her because she wanted to answer the phone. She wanted somebody to talk to. And I felt that if she had just turned off that home phone number and switched to mobile, she could have greatly increased her security and reduced her vulnerability. Google it. Take the phone number of the scammer, even if you missed that call and you're curious, take that number, put it right into Google. You'll be surprised at how many websites actually make money through advertising legitimately, and they actually take other people's input from issues where people have said, hey, look, this oil company called me and wanted to sell me something. And you'd be surprised at how many of those are recorded and tracked and available publicly, so you can just move on and not even engage. So some other advice: passwords should be secure. And here's how you do this. A strong password should be used. A strong password is one that is at least 12 characters long, has lowercase letters, uppercase letters, numbers, and symbols. It can be one of each of these. Would recommend, of course, not a dictionary word, or a word that can be found in some type of a database, names database. Using your first name or your dog's name is all risky behavior, because what that does is it actually makes it so that others can actually use that against you. And you don't want to do that, because people know through social media, if you mention how much you love Wolfie and how he goes and plays fetch, well, they're going to try Wolfie as their password. And if you got creative by putting in numbers at the end of Wolfie, well, guess what? They have a shorter path to guessing the rest of your password, because it's a shorter number of alphanumeric keys that they have to guess. So use strong passwords, and we a lot of times recommend a password manager, because your password should be different per service. If you reuse the passwords like those folks that were affected by the LinkedIn breach in 2016, well, don't be surprised if somebody, because of something that was not within your control, was able to get into one of your other sites. You have to harden your own security. So the best way to do that is to use a password manager, because it will help you create those strong passwords. By the way, a strong password is XO3 $ampersand C29, and this is a strong password, but then you have to remember maybe 100 of those. So a password manager does a great job to make sure it helps you with that security aspect. And also implement two-factor authentication. This is something a lot of us actually know about, but may not know it by name. If you log into your bank's website, the bank automatically does not trust you. Even if you put in your password, they're going to say, hey, you're signing in, but we're going to send you a text message to your cell phone and tell us what that code is that we sent you. And the reason why they do this is because if somebody guesses your password, it is not likely that they also have your cell phone in their possession. This is how two-factor works. It says, give us two pieces of information that confirms that you are the person you say you are. So we highly recommend two-factor. We even recommend it over having weak passwords. So you can have weak passwords. As soon as you put two-factor or multi-factor authentication in, you're already hardening your security to a good level. And also, you can harden your security even further by having antivirus firewall to make sure some of the basics are covered. I know that with Windows, and I know one of the questions that's in the group here is that, is Windows Defender good? It is. It absolutely is. It is a free security software that's built into Microsoft, and that's why Microsoft did it, because their operating system was very insecure by default. So anyone that sets up a new computer should have at least some layer of security, and Windows Defender is fine. We definitely recommend something rather than nothing. Always do backups. Just because security is a process, not a solution. Just because you have antivirus does not mean you will never get infected with a virus. It means that you have to continue to enhance your security, and there are still possibilities of something getting through. And when they do get through, you have backups. At the very least, you can recover from an incident. Your precious memories, your photos, your important documents, manuscripts, they're all protected, and you can still restore from them. We recommend two, because one should be physically there in your home or home office, and the other should be off-site, backed up in the cloud, essentially. So in the event something, even as a disaster strikes, even if your computer gets electrocuted and burns out, you can still recover your data from a new computer. And something new that we've been recommending to clients and the general public, dark web monitoring. This is a type of monitoring that looks for the types of incidents that we spoke about earlier. Will LinkedIn have another breach next month? You may not know. And by the time you know, it may be too late. Well, for instance, a lot of IT companies like us can actually do dark web monitoring, where if we notice an incident occurred and you missed that news article or that publication somewhere, no worries. We're going to send you a message and tell you, hey, this is the password that we found publicly on the internet. If it is a password you recognize, please change it immediately. And then by the time the hackers get to your account, you've already changed your password and you're safe. And lastly, you are the best defense. Please be suspicious. I can't tell you how many people look at emails and miss the basics. Poor grammar, they didn't address you by name, they generalize something. Just be suspicious. Read and think. Up there with that poor grammar example, sometimes people completely assume that that email is authentic and miss that when they hover over that link, it doesn't take you to Amazon.com. It takes you to Amazon.ru in Russia. Is that legit? And use this, not that. A set of recommendations that we've compiled in the PDF that we'll be sharing with you afterward that gives you some common security enhancements that you can do. If you're an AOL user, well, switch to Gmail. It's more secure. If you're using Dropbox, well, maybe the paid subscription of Dropbox is a better choice because you can have more security controls. So a lot of the common mistakes that some people make or things that people are not up to date with and realize, hey, AOL does not have my security in mind. Let's move on to something that does, because my information is worth a lot to me. It's also worth a lot to scammers. So this handy PDF gives you some great ways to transition from one service to another. Okay, so before we go into a little hacking, I figure I'd answer some questions. Ryan and I, Ryan, you want to tackle some of these maybe?
Yeah, so it looks like you've addressed the questions about Norton, McAfee, Windows Defender. If having those programs still make you vulnerable, the short answer is yes, you could still get hacked, even while having a protection like that. So the next question I have here is, should you shut down your computer as much as possible overnight and overnight? I would say it does minimize the risk of somebody, potentially gaining access if you're not there. And in most cases, if you have newer equipment, I generally recommend shutting down. But where your computer is a bit older, if it has a standard hard drive, I tend to not recommend to shut that down as much as possible, because those older traditional hard drives, they tend to go bad far quicker than an SSD drive. And you may wake up to the possible event of the computer just not booting up anymore. So for newer equipment with SSD drives, I would say yes. Older equipment, those traditional hard drives, I would say no. You might want to leave those on.
Ryan, what's an
yes.
SSD drive?
SSD, so that's a solid state drive. So it's comparable to like a USB, like flash memory. And that's kind of been around for, I'd say, the past 7 to 8 years. Probably was invented 9 years ago, but there is unfortunately equipment still sold today with those standard hard drives. So a big the terminology for a standard or a traditional hard drive would be an HDD. So if you see that, on the next computer that you buy compared to an SSD, that's one way to know, it's coming with that older equipment versus the newer equipment. So you're welcome. You definitely want to keep your eye out for SSD. It's a pretty that's probably the biggest component of the computer that you'll notice the most performance. So like boot up times, loading applications, stuff like that. I
Ryan,
know
can I
that was,
piggyback off of one of the things you had mentioned also
yeah,
earlier?
of course.
I understand the question about the security of leaving your computer on versus turning it off. Ryan and I have actually spoken about this topic a few times. It is sort of a double-edged sword, right? While you leave your computer on, it is open. It's on the internet, it's connected. But in most cases, because the way that the computer works, people can't just hop into your network. You have other layers of security. You have a router, you have a firewall, you have things that are outside there that are protecting you. However, leaving it on, we feel is a better practice than turning it off. And the reason why is because if you turn it off, you may be missing the self-maintenance that happens on your computer. So Microsoft will update your computer to protect it more. And if, for instance, you have the habit of turning it off, the computer is aware that if you're actively using it, it's going to back off and it's not going to do those updates. Or it's going to reserve another time for it, which unfortunately delays those updates. So that's that double-edged sword where if a person had left it on, they've already been updated at a time when it was inactive, and then they resumed their operation the next morning and said, hey, let me just search the internet, and they're already up to date with their computer. But those who were turning it off may receive those updates later and ends up being less secure.
Thanks for clarifying that. Then Raina asks if we can recommend a good password manager.
Our doc actually has, for your convenience, our document actually has
okay.
a few that we recommend, so we are good.
Okay, so that will be in the PDF that we, the library will send out afterwards. Then the last question we have here from Nicole, she asks, I've never been on any social media site. Does that make me less vulnerable? That's congrats. That's pretty impressive. I would say that does, in a sense, it's less accounts, less information they would have access to. But ultimately, if you still have poor password hygiene, like reusing same passwords over the other accounts that you do have, you're not really helping yourself there.
Yeah, I do think that it reduces the vulnerability by not having the social media exposure, because what it does is it minimizes the chance somebody can do social reverse engineering with you, and we're going to do a little bit of that later on. We're going to talk about how people can obtain information just by even seeing your passwords, and it's very scary. So social media, a place where people go online and say things like, hey, I'm going on vacation next week, I'm so excited. Well, the problem with that is now you've shared with the world, including people that may not be really that much of your real friends, that you're away for a week. So great, we'll come by on that Tuesday. We'll spend a couple of days at the house, take away everything, and we're all good. So abstaining from social media, I think, is definitely more secure than being involved in it and still being more vulnerable, because even though if you were choosing your words carefully, you might still be in a situation where something is used against you. So I'm glad that you're more protected that way.
And then one more following question from Nicole again. She has an algorithm for creating their passwords, so they are not the same. Is it easy for hackers to figure out the algorithm?
I love the algorithm one. I love it. So basically, the understanding and your algorithm, it all depends on what the algorithm is, but a lot of people that have algorithms will say, look, I'm going to make every website the same base password. It all is going to be cat123. I'm going to use this as an example here. But for Amazon, it'll be cat123 capital A. And for Facebook, it'll be cat123 capital F. And of course, this is a simple example of this. But the idea here is my passwords are all different. It's absolutely okay. The problem with this, and this simple example here does help explain this further. Once you're part of a breach, let's assume that one of these companies has a breach and your password through Amazon is cat123A. Well, they're kind of onto your algorithm, and they have computers that do this. They don't actually have people that do this. They have a computer that says, well, let's try somebody's username that uses this password against all the other ones and change that last letter. Maybe change it to all the other letters of the alphabet and see where you can get in. They know these things, and it doesn't take much for them to figure it out. This is actually reducing your security, not increasing it. But it is a good try, and I've seen for years people are doing that, and it was creative, but now there are computers that can match you on that, and within seconds can figure this out. I agree. Okay, well, let's move on. Thank you so much, and we can have some more questions afterward too. So let's see how we can do some hacking ethically. And the way we're going to do this today is we're going to look at dark web scans for a company that no longer exists. It sort of does exist, but really, I mean, I think we can assume that we're not seeing any Blockbuster videos out there. And what we're about to see is not really going to give away too much. So it'll be enough though. So the reason why we do this is, and that's how we feel it's ethical, because we're not looking at a company that is still in existence in the same way that it was before. We're not actually going to be logging into anyone's accounts right now. We're just going to be observing. So what we did was produce a dark web report for Blockbuster. And this is something that we do for our clients, as I've mentioned before. And we also can do one free for you, actually, if you're interested later on. So let's look at one and just get an understanding of what it is, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper. This is a dark web report. Starting with the first column on the left, the date found, that is the date that something was essentially found by our security researchers. It is not the date that something occurred. So that 2016 breach in LinkedIn, some of that data was actually part of that breach later on. The second column is email. This was the email account that was part of this breach. When we looked up Blockbuster, our system does not discern by names. It just looks at everything that's part of anyone that had a Blockbuster email address. Password hit is actually part of a password. Those letters you see there followed by asterisks, those are actual partial passwords you're seeing of those employees. The complex letters and numbers that you see in the top two rows are called hashes. Hashes are actually the secure or insecure way that companies store our passwords. So if an employee at Amazon sees your account, they're not actually going to see your actual password that you type in. They're going to see this complex characters of hash. And the idea behind the hash is that you can reverse engineer it with software that they have. And in 2016 with LinkedIn, this is essentially what the hacker group was concerned with. They said, you were not storing people's passwords securely because we can reverse engineer them, which, by the way, we're going to do later on. Source is where this was found. In most cases, it's going to be an ID theft forum on the dark web. The dark web, by the way, is the black market of the internet. It has graduated from dark alleys down somewhere in Manhattan to this internet, the secondary internet, that it allows people to operate in an untraceable way. When we're on the internet right now, Cablevision, Verizon reports our IP address, which actually lets people find us, including law enforcement. However, in the dark web, you can operate under the shadows. And these folks have forums where they just share publicly. Here are the passwords I found for 10,000 accounts at a credit card firm. The next column is type. In most cases, it's not disclosed, but what you'll see here is it says combo list. That's usually a large list of information that was just publicly dumped out there. Origin, this is where you would find LinkedIn if it was publicly acknowledged. Facebook, if it was publicly acknowledged. These are companies that now do go out there and they report it, and they tell the government, they say, hey, this happened. We're sorry this happened. We couldn't undo it, but we do want to publicly acknowledge it. And that last column is PII hit, meaning personally identifiable information. When we hover over these, it tells us your name was part of that breach, your email address, your social security number. So it lets us know what type of personal information was part of that breach. In most cases, this is what happens when you download that free app that helps you with your fitness, And when you accept those long agreement terms that none of us really read, well, they tell you in those terms, we're going to share your information with a third party who's going to share it with a third party who's going to share it with a third party. And when they do that, they actually go ahead and when a breach occurs, you never know where, somewhere up the chain, somebody had your information and it was part of that exposure. So now let's do some interesting things with this. Here's a new list, and let's start to develop some trends that we notice here. I'd like to refer to the chat here. Let's give everybody about 30, 40 seconds here. Does anybody want to mention a trend that they notice with what they see on the screen? I feel like we should play Jeopardy music.
Nothing coming through yet. Oh, we have Megan. She mentioned first name dot last name.
So first names and last names are completely acceptable in email addresses, if that's what you meant, Megan. Same date for letters. I'm not sure if you can elaborate further on that.
Oh, maybe maybe David or Davide and Zara.
Well, if the hint here is,
Yeah.
this is one of the challenges that we have, that's right, that's right. If you notice here that both David and Zaira are using the same password within the same organization, a big no-no. These two actually use the same password. This actually tells you about some of the practices that are in an organization and what we reference as bad password hygiene. So good catch, guys. Not using the same password is a better idea than using the same password, because what happens in this case is that if David's information is exposed, hackers are just going to simply see if any other person at that organization used that very same password. And guess what? They're going to get in with Zaira's account. Thank you, Nicole. Let's do another one. Anyone notice something interesting about this part of the sheet here? Something interesting about information that you can gather based on the password you see. That's our focus on this one. I'll give people a few more seconds, and then we'll give you guys a hint. Okay, ready for that hint?
Yeah.
It's within this box. And the exercise here is to use the password to try to get information about the person.
I'm sorry, we're not using the raised hand function. We're getting a lot of people raising their hand. Please use the chat function and type in your question or your
Thank you, John.
answer.
Nicole says first name.
That's right. Just by knowing Paul is the password and the email address is P. Gersani, we now know that this is Paul Gersani at Blockbuster. Just by knowing that, we could probably even look through his LinkedIn profile to find this guy and maybe do something else. Whatever that is, it's just all data gathering to try to do more. Let's do something even crazier. Let's crack a password live. So one of the things I'd mention is that these little characters that you see here are called hashes. They are actually the way that companies will store our passwords securely, or in LinkedIn's case, not so securely. It is so easy now to take these characters, which you can find on the dark web or maybe even through some other lists that are out there, and reverse engineer what the password actually was. And here's how you do it. You copy this and you go to a website called hashes.com, which is available to all of us. We just go anytime, and you paste that string in there. And then you hit the convert button. And we actually get the entire password. That's actually the person's password. Very scary. Easy to reverse engineer a password. Sorry to scare you all today, but thank you for having us today. A couple of things. We're going to share with Joan a PDF, which she can share with the rest of you, whoever's interested. But also, as a thank you for attending today's event, we do have some 1-hour free vouchers for remote or on-site support. We ask that in order for you to be eligible for them, you do have to be present today. But also on top of that, you do have to register to receive that free voucher by this Friday. So we'll send you a link with the PDF, and you just have to click on it. Also, I see that Ryan has posted that in the chat, and you just click on it, register, and we look forward to helping you with a 1-hour free support. You can use it for a dark web analysis. We can do the same thing with you to help you identify any passwords that are floating around on the internet, or if you just need some help with your computer, we're here to help. And we thank you for attending today. And now I'll pass it back to Joan.
Well, I am overwhelmed, to tell you the truth. I am sitting here, okay, I've got to change all my passwords, got to get no dictionary words. I am taking, I'm sure I'm not the only one here. I did have a question. Should we be changing our passwords on a regular basis?
That's a great question that gets actually asked often. Interestingly enough, there's an organization called NIST that actually helps us with security standards and understandings of the psychology behind them. And it used to be good practice to change your password frequently. But what they found was that people were doing something similar to our colleague here that was doing the algorithms, where they were using the same base password. So let's assume that it's June and you're using the password dog123, and maybe in 3 months later, you get that request that says change your password, and you change it to dog456. And then guess what? Maybe you'll do 3 months later again. You'll do dog789. And so they still have the same base password. They can easily guess it, which over time makes you more vulnerable, not less vulnerable. So it is actually now recommended that it doesn't matter what your password is as much. You should still have a secure one, but two-factor replaces that. So having that two-factor, having that phone sending you some message or a code that's sent there will greatly reduce the chance you have to change your password and still be vulnerable. You can actually have a weak password and still have two-factor and be much more secure than if you had a password that was strong and no two-factor.
Okay, well, the thank yous right now are going to come in. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of them. So I expect to get the PDF from you.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is, I don't know how I could get the names of the people, I guess, or just email me at jkuhn@wlsmail.org. That's J, I'll put it in the chat function. And so if you email me, that would be perfect. And I will be sure to include your email, and I will be sure to send it to you.
Because I know that there was also a question in the chat here. Martin, I would say if you could just reach out to us, it would probably be a good approach here. That seems like something that we should talk about one-on-one.
Okay. I thank you all for coming, and please go to our website to see all the programs that we do host. And I thank you so much, Kish and Ryan. Even though you scared me, it was a good scare.
Thanks again for having us.
A necessary scare. So maybe we'll have you again in a couple of years, because things always change, and there you go.
We do love to scare people.
Yeah, and you know, you're right. We all have to be on top of this. It's a different world out there from the one I started in, and we must be prepared. And that's exactly what you were teaching us. So thank you so much for all your help, and have a good evening. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Joan.
Bye.